All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here will be doing our top 10 running backs across college football for the 2025 season. Of course, we'll start with some honorable mentions and work our way down with each individual runner. Starting with a couple of guys who were short of this list. Ahmad Hardy had a standout season for ULM, transfers to Missouri, a big opportunity for him in the SEC. A couple of years of eligibility for him, so big-time chance there. Anthony Hankerson at Oregon State, a little over 1,000 yards, had 15 touchdowns. He was a good playmaker for a Beaver offense that was really weak at times throughout the year. A real bright spot there in a two-man Pac-12 conference. Damon Claiborne, this is a really good player. He probably could have even made the top 10. Almost 1,100 yards rushing, had 254 as a receiver, 13 total touchdowns, and he had another one as well via kickoff return. So this is a do-it-all type of player for Wake Forest. He's been good for a couple of seasons now. That new staff will certainly enjoy having him in their backfield. Quintravion Wisner only had 5 scores for Texas, but I thought at times he showed great dual-threat prowess. C.J. Campbell, his numbers on screen aren't as up to par as these other players, 844 and 11 touchdowns. But for FAU, he was also a great dual-threat player going to Rutgers. You already know replacing Kyle Mongai. He's going to have a giant role there. Very underrated player I wanted to get a little bit of love to. I think the main guy here is a standout, Nick, is going to be Kanye Udo. You don't see guys from the academies really transfer much, if at all, and he transfers to Arizona State to replace who was probably the best running back, well, second best, I guess you could say, with him and Ashton Gianti and Cam Scadaboo. You saw what Cam did in the playoffs. That's a monumental player he has to replace. Over 1,100 yards rushing with 10 scores. Biggest thing here, though, Nick, is this is a gigantic schematic change going from that triple option to more of a modern-day system for a running back. This is a guy who had 1 reception all year long, Nick. Scadaboo, he caught the ball a ton last year. So the usage, you want it to be the same as what Scadaboo's was, but we're really going to find out what he's really made of. And this could flop disastrously for him, or he could, really, progress his game to the next level into being potentially a draft selection.
It's quite bizarre seeing a player, leave from a service academy, in this particular instance, leaving from Army and heading down out west to Arizona State. A guy from New Jersey, 6', 215, ended up leaving, Army, heading to Arizona State, and he had a really good season last year, right? 1,100 yards rushing, the 10 touchdowns on the ground, but only had that 1 catch, had a really good game against Tulane earlier in the season, towards the back half of the season in the conference title game. For him, 20 carries for 158 yards and a touchdown. Did not have a great day in the loss against Navy in the Army-Navy game. Had a decent enough time in some of the other games on the schedule, but really broke out in that conference title game against Tulane. He's a fast runner. I think he's a really solid athlete. The scheme change is certainly something you have to keep an eye on. What will that look like? But this is a kid that has a lot of high upside. He's going to get a ton of opportunities early on, right? They're going to hand the ball off to him a ton early on. They got to replace that production of Scadaboo. So I think it's certainly fascinating to see what that looks like. This is a kid that's got high upside. It's certainly a gamble, right, for Kenny Dillingham and company. This is a huge gamble, grabbing a guy from a service academy and seeing what you can do. But he's got tons of talent. This is a big boomer bust player. I'm really excited to see how it shapes out for the Arizona State Devils.
Scadaboo was, of course, a workhorse for him last year. He only had 2 games of 20-plus touches. Flirted with that number a few times last year, but he was really effective and, saw only 179 carries. Moving to number 10 on our list, Jaden Ott. He's certainly more talented than being number 10, but last year was a disaster for him, mainly because he was banged up all season long. He was just very poor in terms of efficiency, and due to that, I can't really put him much higher. This is a player that in the past, as a 4-star recruit, who's shown the ability to be a dual threat. I really like what he can do as a pass catcher. Great cuts in the short area. He, showcases nice patience. He embraces contact. I think overall he's a shifty player. Can really find his lane and hit a burst. But last year was a bit of a disaster for him, Nick, so 10 is certainly not great, but that's kind of the spot that he's going to end up at after only having 3.3 yards per carry last season as the number 2 runner for them. Javion Thomas ended up being better in terms of everything across the board. So Ott here, it's going to be a battle-tested season for him, but if he's fully healthy, he should remind everybody how good he is.
The Jaden Ott we saw in 2024 is not the Jaden Ott that you should expect to see in 2025. This is a kid that had an incredibly strong 2023 with 1,300 yards rushing and 12 scores, 5.3 yards per carry. That dropped 2 yards per carry with 3.3 average in 2024, below 400 yards rushing, 4 touchdowns. Certainly the touches, were more than half, so that's certainly part of the problem as well. But he was banged up, just was not feeling himself. He just had a rough season. Still had a decent season in the pass game, right? 222 9.2 yards receiving, 9.3 yards per grab, and a score for him as a receiver, similar to those numbers put up in 2023. If he can get the 2023 rushing numbers and some receiving numbers similar to what he had last year, he will be a very strong and talented back for this Cal offense that still looks to be a strong unit, even with their quarterback moving on and finding a new spot in front of Mendoza, who moved on and left the program. I think this Cal offense still has high upside. I think Ott is still an incredibly talented player, so fun to watch, such a shifty and fast back who had a really good season 2 years ago. I'm expecting him to step back to those similar levels in 2025.
Now I move to number 9, Jamal Haynes. He had 1,000 yards 2 seasons ago and came up just shy of that in 2024. This is a player I really like for Georgia Tech. They don't ask him to do too much. Didn't have a single game of over 20 carries in each of the last 2 seasons, so he's not out here getting obliterated with his usage. And, in games where they don't need him to do anything, they don't use him. Against VMI in a blowout, they didn't use him all that much. Georgia State, he ended up getting a bit of a longer leash, and he was productive in that one. In the loss to Syracuse, though, he was quite poor. Same with Notre Dame, Virginia Tech. So there's games here where he wasn't all that great, but against Miami, 83 yards on only 3 carries. He had a big, long rushing touchdown early in that game. Got a concussion on the next carry, wasn't in for the rest of the contest. Then against Georgia, he almost had 100 yards as well. And then I like what he did, 8 yards per carry in the bowl game. Season high, 136 yards there. So the production here is certainly sporadic, Nick, but this is a guy who's a powerful runner, has shown good ability to stop on a dime. He can change directions, slashing type runner, good speed. And again, that efficiency was a bit of a concern, and he didn't show as much power as a contact runner this past year. This is undoubtedly a top 10 running back, though, Nick, and if they wanted to pound him into the ground, his production would certainly be higher.
They can certainly run the ball a lot more than they did with him. I think this is an offense in Georgia Tech that likes to run the ball. They're certainly going to focus on doing that, but they have some quarterback options that have been involved with that sort of hampers some of the ability for Haynes here. This is a running back that I think is a really strong, powerful runner. Didn't eclipse the 1,000-yard mark in 2024, but did it in 2023. He's around that similar, 950 to 1,000 yards per season range. I think he'll get the double-digit touchdowns this year in terms of straight rushing touchdowns. He had 12 touchdowns total between receiving and rushing touchdowns last year. Had 3 receiving touchdowns in this offense. I think he's a really talented back. I think the speed on him is good, 5'9", 190. A nice burst off the line, solid speed. They didn't use him a whole lot to try and protect him a little bit, which I get when, at that size, maybe that's something you want to do. But I could see him getting a lot of carries this year, maybe pushing towards that 180, 190 range after having 170 and 175 in the past couple of seasons. I think you push it maybe a little bit closer to 200 and see what you can do with him on the ground. This is a back that I love the speed, love the high football IQ here. And I think this is a Georgia Tech offense that, similar to Cal, a Georgia Tech offense that I'm pretty high on that I think has a lot of upside coming into the season.
Another one with a lot of upside, number 8, Louisville Cardinals runner Isaac Brown. You could probably put this guy higher. He had such an impressive year. There were 5 deep at running back coming into the season. With playing time up for grabs, the top 3 runners all ended up being freshmen. Brown was one of them. This guy had almost 1,200 yards, including technically 5 rushing, 100-plus yard rushing performances. He had 99 in the bowl game. So we'll go ahead and give him 600-yard performances, Nick. This is a guy that really stood out on film, really uses leverage in the block scheme well. Home run speed, does a good job finding run lanes at the second level. Really like what he was able to do from an effectiveness standpoint. Skill as a pass catcher, but he wasn't using that role a whole lot. It was against Notre Dame. He had a beautiful receiving touchdown. Those was only one of the year. He showcased a little bit of skill on that one. More consistent ball security as well, something the young player has to work on. This player was great, though, Nick. I think, the ceiling is incredibly high for Isaac Brown. Keeping up the momentum, though, in college sports is incredibly difficult. Do you think he's going to be able to elevate his play, or is he going to fall off a little bit after a nice explosion in year 1?
I think he can elevate his place the exact same size as the previous running back. Talk about Haynes. That 5'9", 190. Had a really good freshman season. Also involved in special teams as well. Had 11 kickoff returns for about 200 yards total, about 25 yards per return. So those are decent numbers. Also had 2 punt returns that didn't go too far at all. But he's a guy that 11 rushing touchdowns was solid. Nearly 1,200 yards rushing is a really good number. 7.1 yards per attempt is a really impressive number when you see that high per carry. I don't expect the number that high this coming season. I think he's a guy that can be involved in your offense and be a really talented back. A young guy, another year to learn the playbook, another year to learn college football and get developed and build your football IQ, I think will really do a lot for this running back. This is a kid that I think he's got tons of talent. He's a decent pass catcher as well. We'll see if they use him a lot more in the offensive system that way this year. Curious to see what the plan there is. This is a back that's so good. I think high upside certainly there. He deserves to be on this list despite being a freshman last year and only having 1 year of body of work to work with for us to break down here. But I think this is a guy that's got a ton of high upside. I expect him to have another strong season here.
Now I move to number 7, Dalen Edwards from Kansas State. Everyone remembers him from his debut performance with Colorado. He He had 4 touchdowns in that game. He only had 1 more the rest of the year for the Buffaloes, so he ends up transferring out to KSU. And I honestly thought he would have more opportunity than he did. I thought they would have more of a 1-2 punch. DJ Giddens, that was such a good player. You don't have to do that, and I think that's good to keep his legs fresh for this upcoming season. He got the opportunity in the bowl game, though. He had almost 200 yards rushing with 2 scores. And in the receiving end, he had another one as well. This is a nice dual-threat player. He's going to get a lot of work. Great speed. He can plant and hit the hole with burst very quickly. His effectiveness as a pass catcher is incredibly noted. Typically on rail routes, seam routes, wheels, this guy has a nice little route tree from out of the backfield. Problem is he does have a bit of a smaller frame, so he's likely not going to be that workhorse that Giddens was. He won't have much of a goal line effect either, and he's certainly not a power runner. And sometimes Kansas State really needed that, and that's what Giddens brought to the table. 5'9", 167. Nick is a very limited size, but that allows you to be as explosive as he is, and I think that's why he's going to come in as a top 10 running back this year. This Kansas State offense is very effective on the ground, and they're going to find ways to get him involved more often than not this year. So even though he's not probably going to be honing in anywhere near as many touches as Giddens or the other backs on this list, he's going to be very effective this year.
He's going to get a lot of yardage on his limited touches, 7.4 yards per attempt last year. Really strong numbers there. They're going to give him touches, but they're not going to be as much as they give some of the other backs, obviously, because the size is certainly a problem here. But I think on his limited touches, he showed a lot of burst in speed, 546 and 5 touchdowns on those 75 carries. So limited numbers there. He had a 65-yard rush, which was his longest of the season. We saw him kind of break out to start at Colorado and thought that could be things to come in the future, but it didn't really end up working out fully for him at Colorado. He ends up transferring. Was a really solid receiver for them, right? Had 300 yards receiving and 4 touchdowns, 8.3 yards per catch. In 2023 at Colorado, had a little bit less numbers. This past season had 19 grabs for 130 yards, 7 yards per grab, and 2 touchdowns. But I think he'll be involved certainly in the passing attack for Kansas State as well. Looked really good in the bowl game against Rutgers, had a strong record-breaking day there. Looked really good in that matchup. I think that's a sign of things to come, right? Use him when you can. Use the speed, use the burst. He's really good at bumping outside and really trying to find it, hitting the holes hard here. This is a kid I think has a lot of upside. He'll continue to develop his game. Sure, the frame is undersized, and that definitely concerns me, but the speed burst that he can have on the ground is phenomenal. Once he gets that top speed, it's going to be very tough to catch him and chase him down. I expect a couple of long touchdowns this season coming from Edwards if he can find the hole and break free. A very talented back that could be really good in this Kansas State offense.
Now I move to Jonah Coleman over at Washington. This is a player who's been pretty consistent over 3 years and was a freshman at Arizona. Wasn't used as much, but he still had almost 5 yards per attempt and 4 scores. Nearly, I think he's at over 2,000 rushing now. This is a player that's going to be very monumental in an offense I think is really going to explode this year. They have a lot of talent at the table. And, a guy who brings good balance. He can also plant and hit the hole with some nice burst. Really like his hands out of the backfield. Even though he's not as consistent as a pass catcher, he does have nice hands, strong after contact runner. He's really impressed as a pass blocker as well, so that's going to earn him extra reps on third down. That's certainly going to allow him to skyrocket up draft boards as well. He posted a picture the other day, Nick. He's been really working on his body. He's really improved physique. That's going to lead to, better contact balance, more strength, being able to stay on the field longer. So I think those are things he already excels in, but now that he's working on his body, his performance is going to only get better after, 1,000-yard season rushing. He should easily topple 1,000 yards again this year for an upstart Washington squad.
This is a guy that I think has a lot of high upside in this Washington offense, and I feel the same as you. I think this Washington offense is going to be really good this year, going to be a strong, high-flying offense. I like what they have at quarterback play. I think this is a good running back in Jonah Coleman. He was solid at Arizona, but nothing that jumped off the screen as anything crazy, right? 871 yards, 6.8 yards per carry, and 5 scores in his final season in 2023. Followed his coach up north, had 1,000 yards in 2024, 5.5, and 10 scores. Good numbers there. Was involved in the passing game as well with 23 grabs for 177 yards. Expect him to be involved in the passing game this upcoming season. I think the speed on him is really solid. Again, the footwork is good. A junior has got some experience playing. Made some appearances in 2022 as a freshman. Last year made some appearances, and in 2024 made some appearances as well. So he's got some experience. Has been around a little bit here. 9 touchdowns at Arizona over the 2 seasons, 10 last year. So got that double-digit plateau. A really nice spot for him to continue to start. I expect him to have double-digit touchdowns again this year, pushing that 15 range on the ground. I think he'll be really good for this offense. It's an offense that, like I said, is a high-flying offense that I have a lot of faith in, that they can do a whole lot this year, and having good balance on the ground with Coleman will certainly help out and relieve the pressure on their young quarterback who's hoping to take a massive step forward this year. I like what this offense looks like for Washington here, and I like what Coleman can do. I think this is a very talented back that slots in pretty respectively on our list here.
Moving to number 5, Darius Taylor out of Minnesota. This is a player who's been very good over the last 2 years. Of course, in 2023, he had almost 800. He had exactly 800 yards rushing across only about 4 or 5 games. So he was unable to stay on the field in 23. But when he was on the field, he was monumental for him. Didn't hit 1,000 yards this season. Missed the season opener against UNC, and then after that, he was able to rip off a handful of impressive performances. 5 games of 100+ yards. This is a player who showcases a nice suddenness. I really like his jump cut. Great burst as well. He doesn't really have much long speed. Durability is maybe at times been a little iffy. He can be a workhorse, though, and he's a versatile player at the same time. We caught 54 passes for 350 yards and 2 touchdowns. One issue here, though, is his efficiency was very bad in certain games. Against Iowa and Michigan, he had less than 40 yards, only 30 against UCLA, 28 against Rutgers. Now, these are all teams that have pretty stout run defenses, minus Rutgers, who wasn't as strong as the other 3 this year. But this offensive line, Nick, I thought was good enough to be able to put up better performances against those tougher defenses, and he was not all that great. He did have 2 touchdowns against Michigan, though, and of course he made his presence felt as a pass catcher of a season-high 10 receptions. So he'll make his talent known in some which way or another, but the lack of efficiency in some of those games was a bit of a concern.
It certainly was a bit of a concern. This is a back that I think is really strong, physical, 6 foot 215, a huge physical back, a bruising back that can really lay down a hit and take a lot of contact. 205 carries this past season, 4.8 yards per attempt, just below 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns for him, had an 80-yard carry as well at one point in the season, was pretty good as a receiver for this team, 350 yards receiving, 6.5, and 2 scores for him, was involved in the offense in that regard. Certainly, when you look at the splits in the game logs, they're a little concerning at times. I thought he had a really good bowl game with Virginia Tech, 113 yards, 5.7, and a score there. But some of the games that you rattled off there, like the game against Rutgers, Penn State, Maryland, UCLA, all really poor performances. Did not have great showings there. Definitely had some better showings against weaker teams like Nevada and URI earlier on in the season. Had a good day against USC on the ground of 144 and 5.8 yards per carry. I'm expecting this offensive line to be solid for Minnesota. I think they'll be able to create some good holes here. This is a guy that's got good football IQ. I think he's really got a good jump cut, solid, change of direction, really good football vision on the field. Doubled his touchdown total from 2023 and 2024. Certainly the average was down, which I think is disappointing. If you're a Minnesota fan, you'd like to get that average back up to that 5.5, 5.6, 5.7 yards per carry range. I think it's certainly possible depending on how many carries he gets this year. This is a back that I think is a really talented player who should be the lifeblood of his offense, but I just want to see what the offensive line looks like, what the protection looks like, and how many opportunities they can create for this running back.
Now we'll move to number 4. It only made sense to bunch the Penn State duo together. I have them coming in at number 4 here. I think it's respectable. Obviously, this is probably going to be the top duo in college football with a pretty wide margin. But in terms of individual talent, I'll go ahead and just slot them in here at 4, Nick. They each had over 1,100 yards, played 15 and 16 games respectively, of course. But the effectiveness got better as the season went on. I was very impressed that they were finally able to utilize this duo to win football games. I know in the past they've been great since day one they got there, but this past year they finally both put it together and showcased nice consistency throughout the year. I'm going to start with Katron Allen. He ended up being the team's leading rusher, showcases great leg drive, like the patience with vision, allows him to pick the right hole. He's pretty decisive in the open field as well. Singleton, on the other hand, he has good size, allows him to attack the inside with confidence. He's got great speed on the edge as well. Love his toughness. Does need to refine the rest of his game a little bit, blocking, pass catching. But his pass catching was much improved this past season. Really like what he was able to provide with 41 grabs for 375 and 5 touchdowns, 17 total touchdowns. Nick, what do you think of this duo from Penn State? The production's off the charts, of course. They do have more games than other people played, but the efficiency was finally there this year on a more consistent basis.
The efficiency was there, and I think I'm expecting more of the same out of this Penn State offense. It really seems like Penn State's just going to run it back with the talent they have. Drew Allur's coming back. He looks like he's going to be ready to make a big step forward. The two backs come back to put together the most deadly duo on the ground of any school in the country, and I think this offense is going to be just as strong for Penn State, if not better. I think this is a really good sign if you're a Penn State fan. This team made a deep run in the college football playoffs right to the semifinal, and they're returning all this talent. You got to feel good if you're an Nittany Lions fan with the way that coaching is as well. And having these two backs, I don't blame you. These are incredibly talented backs that complement each other. Ketron Allen, 5'11", 230 roughly. He had a really good year. I think the speed on him is really good, about 1,100 yards rushing, 5 yards per carry, 8 scores last year, plus 2 receiving touchdowns. He's really good back for this offense. He's a guy that's steadily improving and having solid showings, had at least 850 yards per season over his 3 seasons as a starter. When you look at Singleton, he had a down year in 2023 compared to 2022, but got back to those same heights from 2022 and 2024. Had 1,000 yards rushing his first season, then was down to 750. Now back up to 1,100 yards rushing, 6.4 yards per carry, and 4 scores. In addition to really finding his footing in the passing game, 375 yards receiving, 9.1 yards per grab, and 5 scores. Really grew as a player there, starting to round out his full profile as a football player. 6'2", about 230 as well. So has just a little bit of inch on him as well. So these are two very similar backs in that regard. The speeds of them are very good here. I like that Singleton's getting involved as a pass catcher. That's very key, I think, for his offense as well. The double-digit touchdowns for him last year was a really solid number. When these guys, the fact these guys are splitting touches and they still got 20, cumulative rushing touchdowns between the two of them, I think are very impressive stats. I'm expecting the same out of Penn State's offense this year. I'm expecting both backs to have phenomenal years, be over 1,000 yards rushing, and each get 10 touchdowns on the ground as this team looks to be competitive for a national title with the way that this offense is certainly built.
Yeah, Andy Kalinecki is really able to get them utilized in the right, proper fashion. Great stuff from Penn State. Moving to number 3, since 2017, Oregon's had a 1,000-yard rusher every single season minus the COVID year. And you're going to meet the next one here in Makai. He was coming off 2 phenomenal seasons for Tulane, 1,378 yards and 7 scores in 23. Over 1,415 scores this past season. This is a guy they feed a lot, though. He gets a lot of touches. He's a goal line bulldozer. Does a good job of stretching runs to the edge as well when it calls for, good burst and long speed. He's really tough through contact. The first guy he usually sheds. Not much shiftiness in the open field. Questions about him being a 3-down back, with limited pass catching upside and pass blocking. That's fine, though, Nick. That's not really, a negative because that's just not his style. He's 5'11", 210 pounds. Him being, a tough physical bulldozer type player that I talked about is what his style is. And I think he's going to fit right, very well into the Big Ten. I think they're going to expect him to be, a player that's got a very long leash. He's going to be, slotted into the lineup day one. Do you think this, change in conference is going to bother him at all? Because it's obviously a more physical one than he was used to seeing in the AAC. But I think this player is built for it.
I think this player is built for it. Product out of Birmingham, Alabama, played at Huffman High School, a bigger school in that area, but not a great football school. He ended up carving out a solid high school career before going to Tulane and really finding his footing in a lower conference, and now transferring to Oregon, right? You saw steady improvements for him over the past 2 seasons, 1,375 yards in his 2023 season, 7 touchdowns, 1,400 yards last year, and 15 touchdowns, 5.3 yards per carry in each of those seasons. Had more grabs as a receiver this year, 176 yards receiving, plus 2 scores. He's a back. I love the speed on him. This kid is just, uber talented, right? You're plugging him into a system that has a really solid way of building running backs. I think, some of the open field ability is questionable at times, and you really wonder if he can play, multiple downs in a row. That's something I have to keep an eye on, certainly. But this is a guy that's really good in the red zone, a really solid back that is going to get touchdowns when you give him the ball in the red zones. Really solid through contact, can throw people off him, can take that physicality. Yes, the physicality is jumping up the Big Ten, but I think he can still make it work. This is a back that's very high on. And when you're playing in a system like Oregon, right, you're going to get touches, you're going to get a lot of carries, and you're going to get a lot of yards. I think this will be a 1,000-yard rusher easily in this Oregon system. I think it makes a ton of sense for him to have a lot of success early on in this Ducks offense.
Moving to number 2, their team in Notre Dame that also has a nice collection of backs, but the top one's going to be Jeremiah Love, 1,100 yards and 17 touchdowns for him. Added 2 more in the receiving game. This is a player who, unfortunately, was really beat up in the college football playoff. He had that 99-yard touchdown against Indiana. Didn't really do anything else the rest of the game. It wasn't really able to play against Georgia, Penn State, or Ohio State, combined, about 20-plus touches in those 3 games. So it was unfortunate we didn't get to see much from him. He had a phenomenal touchdown, though, against Penn State, Nick, in the Orange Bowl. Remember, he was stuffed at the goal line, kept the wheels turning, and he got there. But throughout the year, this guy was very productive, and he was incredibly efficient, almost 7 yards per attempt. They didn't use these guys a whole lot. He didn't have a single game he had one game that is a 15-plus carries, Nick, so they didn't have to use these running backs a whole lot. And you love to see that, guys who can be effective and, keep their wheels fresh for, a long career or a long season. Love is an impressive athlete. You've seen him hurdle people numerous times, and that's pretty good for being a bigger back. I thought it just shows how big of a physical specimen he really is. Good long speed, good vision in zone running. And again, that sucks that he wasn't, banged up in he was banged up in the CFB, and he's been a bit of pure check down option in the receiving game. Another one of those backs, though, Nick, that is just highly impressive, and hopefully he can stay on the field a lot longer this year. 6'2", 210. What do you make of this prospect here?
This is a back that's incredible, right? He had a really strong season this past year. Notre Dame, they're going to run the ball around, right? That's their entire, offensive MO. Really, they're going to run the ball a ton. They do throw the ball in, positive situations, but they're going to run the ball a lot. They're going to ground and pound. They're going to attack you. 6'2", 205. Such a talented back. The speed on him is so good. 1,100 yards rushing, 17 touchdowns for him, the highest number of, any of the backs we talked about so far on this list. 2 receiving touchdowns as well. 235 yards receiving is really good numbers there. 6.9 yards per carry, and a very impressive number. He dealt with some health issues last year. Can he be fully healthy this year? I think that's really important. He doesn't have the best pass receiving ability, but I think he's still a back that you can really rely on. Impressive athlete, can hurdle people despite the size, which I think is really impressive, is really good, has nice burst and solid long distance speed, a really good leading back for this offense. They have a good room overall up there in South Bend. This is a team that, again, went far in the college football playoff. They went to the national title game. They're going to hope to ride Love and the rest of their backfield this year to a similar production. I think it's certainly possible with the way that this backfield looks. It's a very strong backfield led by Love here, who I think is a really talented back. 163 carries. To get that type of production of 160 carries is quite impressive. 7 yards per attempt was a really strong showing for him, and you wonder if he can keep up that type of production this upcoming season.
Now I move to the number 1 running back in the country. I think it's clear-cut and obvious here. Desmond Reed for Pittsburgh. He followed his offensive coordinator over from Western Carolina last year, and he was an immediate impact player, and he stayed that way the entire year. 966 rushing and only 5 scores. Certainly not the most eye-shattering numbers. He also had a punt return touchdown. He had 579 and 4 scores receiving. This is a guy who is a phenomenal receiving back, Nick. He had 10 grabs for 100-plus yards against Clemson, had a $155 and a score out of the backfield against UNC. And then he had 100 yards and a 1-point win over Cincinnati. There was a comeback from behind victory, I'm pretty sure. And he also had 2 more scores and 50 yards the next week. This guy is a high-impact performer as a pass catcher. Handful of games scattered in there where he didn't do a whole lot. He did have 5 games running the ball of under 50 yards. So, first-time player at the FBS level, I'd say he knocked it out of the park, even though he did have some games, again, they weren't as impressive in terms of, consistency. But, his size certainly means he won't be a workhorse on a weekly basis. With that smaller frame also limits his upside in pass protection, 5'8", 175. But, again, Nick, sometimes your size will lead to obvious negatives, but the positives are too juicy. And that includes the aforementioned versatility, the ability to have great route running. Lateral quickness is impressive. I love the acceleration, ball security, and toughness. This guy had 38 touches in the bowl game. That one went back and forth against Toledo. He didn't want to come out of the game, Nick. That's how much he wanted to win that contest. And he proved he could be a workhorse. Now, I don't expect to see that on a weekly basis, but the versatility and the highlight reel on this kid was impressive last year. And again, it was only his first year at this level. He should really blossom in 2025.
He should continue to develop and turn into a star. He had a really good year at Western Carolina, his final year there, about 900 yards rushing, 6.8 yards per carry, and 13 scores in his final season in that offense. Moves over to Pitt with his offensive coordinator and has a good season. I think he's a strong player that continues to develop. Another guy that's getting more experience, 1,000 yards rushing nearly last year, just below that threshold, 5.3 yards per carry and 5 scores for him last year. 4 receiving touchdowns as well in the 570. In passing receiving yards, 11.1 yards per grab for him. He is a true dual threat in that regard, right? Involved in the offense in multiple different ways. Someone you have to really scheme for on defense. Keep an eye on. This is a back that I think is really a lot of high upside that fits really well in this system. It's tailor-made for him. 5'8", 175, a little bit undersized, but certainly has that speed that you can work with and use that high speed, high tempo. Looked good in the bowl game against Toledo. I thought he had a really solid game in that one when I was watching that game. I know they lost that game, but he still had 170 yards on the ground and 1 score, like you said there. Some of the games were a little shaky at times, but had a great game against Cal. Had 2 really good games to open the season against Cincinnati and Kent State that were strong performances. Some of the ACC opponents, he struggled the game against Syracuse, so they didn't really throw the ball in that month. They were winning in a blowout fashion early on. Had a tough part of the season when this team in Pitts lost 4 in a row to end the season, regular season. He struggled, didn't break the 100-yard threshold in any of those games. But I expect him to be a really reliable producer across this season. This is the back that's got a lot of high upside here. I'm expecting closer to 6 yards per carry this year, over 1,000 yards certainly, and a lot of passing plays scheduled into his playbook and sort of drawing up some stuff in the scheme for him. I think Desmond Reed will be an incredible back. Certainly a guy you have to watch this year. This Pitt offense in general, I think, will be really solid in the ACC. I like what they're returning here.
This list certainly isn't as impressive as it was last year, where there was an elite collection of runners, but there's still a lot of great talent here across college football at the RB position. It should be a great year for a lot of these players. Be interesting to see how it works out As always, Nick, appreciate you joining me.
Looking forward to college football. It's fun to talk about running backs here, a position that I think is still so valuable in the sport. We saw last year with Janty and Scadaboo. These guys got to step up and really be dominant like they were last year. I wonder what these backs can do this year.
Make sure to like, subscribe, comment. See you next time.